So as a designer, there are a few different approaches you can take to designing more sustainable products. In this first topic, we're going to talk about green design, and so green design is what you do when you are trying to consider the environment when making your product. So it's a real focus on the product itself. So definition of green design is that it is a redesign focusing on re-engineering of the design to reduce its environmental impact and increase its sustainability. So you're sticking with kind of your original design and you're just kind of tweaking it to try and make it greener. So the kinds of changes that green design usually focuses on are incremental. So incremental means just small changes over sort of small changes that build on previous changes. Generally, it's a low risk approach to making your product more sustainable. You're not radically redesigning your product. You're just finding smaller, low risk ways that you can make it more environmentally friendly. Usually, green design is implemented over a short time scale, which we talked earlier about how that can help companies to meet legislation or laws that they have to abide by. And generally, they focus on one or two environmental objectives. So some examples of these objectives are things like you might decide to switch to a different material that can be recycled, or you might start using solar energy to manufacture your product, or find a lower energy way to do it, or you might just increase the durability of your product so it lasts longer and doesn't have to be replaced so often. So that's sort of green design in a nutshell. So let's go back to, here we go back. So there's two kind of approaches or principles that guide green designers. They both have slightly different end goals. So first one is the prevention principle. So as a designer, you want to avoid making as much waste as possible when you're making your product, using it, and it gets disposed of. So you're trying to always make sure that you're using as little waste as product. So you're preventing any extra material or energy being used that you don't have to. So the second approach is the precautionary principle. So they sound very similar. The difference is precautionary means that you are going to try and figure out what are all of the problems that might occur, not just to do with the material or energy waste, but any other problems related to the production, use, and disposal of the product that might happen. So this might be things like transportation of the product to the consumer, things like that. And so you would take measures to mitigate or eliminate them. You might put your factory closer to where the consumers are. So this kind of takes a lot of thinking ahead and sort of future casting, it's called, to try and predict any negative environmental impacts. So those are the two principles you should be able to describe to do with green design. So the goals of green design, and a lot of this is kind of a bit repetitive, but so there's a number of goals of green design that you should be able to articulate. So the first one, there are goals to do with materials. So as we've talked about, there is reducing the quantity of materials, making sure the materials aren't toxic, minimizing the number of different materials. So the more your product is made out of one material, the easier it is for that product to be recycled at end of life. And it's also generally easier to join that material together. So if you have two different materials, a good example from our workshop would be acrylic and plywood. The only way to join those together is to use an epoxy resin, which once it cures is extremely, extremely strong and makes it very difficult to get those two materials apart. And labeling all the materials in your design as well, so that people who are taking them apart can easily identify them and then categorize them so that they go into the correct waste stream. So that's materials, that's goal number one. Second goal is to reduce the amount of energy that you use to manufacture your product. So this could potentially mean switching to sustainable or renewable energy sources. Third goal is to reduce pollution and waste. So we talked about that in clean technology. We talked about how there's end-of-pipe and system solutions that manufacturers can take to do that. You want to consider the pollution that might occur at the end of life of the product. And you can design to make it more durable so that it lasts longer. Okay, so all of those things will reduce the pollution and waste that your product causes. Those are the three kind of goals of green design. And so this next section is just kind of an overview of strategies that designers can implement or use to meet those goals. Again, there's quite a lot of, this is really a review of a number of topics that we've already talked about, but just kind of putting them in the category or in the bucket of green design. So first one is dematerialization. So that could involve reducing the overall size of your product, weight of your product, the number of materials you use. It could also mean changing how you engineer your product. So for example, a good lightweighting strategy, which you might actually see if you've ever watched any of the products in our workshop get 3D printed, is called honeycombing. So rather than the walls being solid, you have buttresses, honeycomb-shaped buttresses instead that still provide structural stability, but there's a lot more space between them that will use less material. The big but when it comes to dematerialization, it's great to reduce the amount of material, but you do not want to be affecting the quality of the product. And that's where CAD modeling tools like finite element analysis can be really useful. So the third strategy is to try and use low impact materials. So just because they're biodegradable does not necessarily mean that they are the best material. If they're biodegradable but they break down really quickly and affect the durability of your product, that may not be. If they're biodegradable but there's nowhere to actually dispose of them where they will biodegrade, so for example, organic materials without oxygen still don't biodegrade, even though they will compost. Compost if there's oxygen. You want to make sure that you are thinking about the function of your product and you're selecting the most appropriate material that has the least impact. That's often there's a trade-off between the two. So the trick is to make sure you're not using toxic materials and you're using the best one for the function of the product, which has the least impact, and then no toxic or hazardous materials. You want to always design for disassembly. So we've already talked about that in a different topic. Making sure you choose materials that are easily joined together, and that means they can also be easily taken apart, and making sure that all the valuable material in your product can, at the end of life, be separated and recovered. And then you want to design for longevity. So the longer you can make your product last, the less impact long-term it will have on the environment. And generally, if you produce a high-quality product that lasts a long time, think MacBooks, then consumers like those kinds of products. And that's it. So that's a quick overview of green design.